Hi, welcome to my channel, Star Wars Comic Collector. I'm here today with Rachel Prince. We are here to talk about A Dark Empire. Now, what's going to make this video different than other videos you've watched? Rachel, you might have read the occasional Archie or Richie Rich or something.
Yes, I loved Betty and Veronica.
Betty and Veronica, but you've definitely never read a Star Wars comic.
I have not.
So I've asked Rachel to read Dark Empire. This was her first time reading the comic, and I'm hoping that this will generate an interesting discussion, something that you guys will enjoy. So first, a couple things about Dark Empire. First issue was released all the way back in December of 1991. The writer is Tom Veitch. The artist is Cam Kennedy. He's got quite an art style.
Does. Yes, I love the art.
Okay, you did like the art.
I did.
What about the writing?
I have questions.
Okay. Well, we'll get to that in a
Okay.
second. I'm just going to give a synopsis. So for those of you guys that have never read Dark Empire, and I assume that's going to be a very small number of you on my channel, Dark Empire basically is about the resurgence of the Empire and the return of Emperor Palpatine. I assume that's probably the big claim to fame for the story. So it features all of our heroes: Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, Chewbacca, R2-D2, and C-3PO. They all have a part in it. It introduces a few more characters, and then the main bad guy, Emperor Palpatine. I believe he doesn't show up until the second or third issue. You read it as a trade, so I don't know if they broke it down.
He is in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if they broke that down by here's the first issue, here's the second issue. For you, it was just one giant story.
One giant story.
Yeah. Okay. So with that said, let's ask Rachel some questions.
Okay.
Okay. Rachel, just before before we dive into the comic, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is it you do?
I am a retired English teacher.
Okay.
Taught literature for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I am a diehard Star Wars fan, as evidenced by my license plate.
Right.
My Millennium Falcon watch.
Right. Yes.
I have loved them since 1977, where I stood in a line around the building to get into Episode 4. So, diehard fan of the films.
Mm-hmm.
Very little, if not zero, knowledge about any canon outside.
Have you watched any of the television series?
I have. I loved Ahsoka. I love Mandalorian. I did not see Boba Fett.
Right.
Or I haven't watched The Acolyte yet.
Okay.
I love the Kenobi series too.
You and I, just so the audience here knows, you and I are related.
We are related.
You're my sister-in-law.
Yes, I have known Ron for longer than half my life.
Yep, and and I've been married to your sister for more than half my life. Okay, good. Okay, so what was your overall impression of the book? You've read the comic entirely now. What was your overall impression?
Overall impression is tempered with my new understanding of the entrance of the graphic novel into literature courses in high schools.
Okay.
That is becoming a new genre that before now, comics were the dessert at the end of you read literature, you read something purely for fun.
Mm-hmm.
There's now graphic novel versions of many of the greats. There's even a sophomore class right now reading The Diary of Anne Frank in graphic novel form.
Okay.
And I'm sure you've heard of the most recently banned book that has to do with the Holocaust, and it's in graphic novel form, and it's phenomenal. So I need to shift my storytelling purist mind from there are other ways to tell a story than simply words on the page.
Sure.
So I enjoyed that you have to use your imagination. I'm picturing a kid picking up a comic or a graphic novel more readily than he might pick up a traditional book.
Right.
And if a kid is lost in a story, I'm delighted. Because using your imagination to, you're watching a battle taking place and you have to follow what's happening where and really scrutinize the artwork. I did have to jump around on the page a bit to try to follow who's saying what when,
Right.
but to absorb a story in a different format than I'm used to is really interesting for me. I like that.
Now, what's just on that tangent? There is a little bit of a difference between modern comic books and what you read
What I
here.
would've-
What you read here in 1991, it was very common for them to have captions and even thought balloons. I'm not sure if there were any thought balloons in the Dark Empire, but there might have been a few where people were this is what they were thinking, not what they were
Not saying out loud. Sure.
Captions and thought balloons do not occur in modern comics, or at least a lot of the modern comics.
Well, then
The ones I read,
then let me
it's
ask
mostly
you-
just dialogue, and the artists have to be very, very good at projecting and portraying what somebody's thinking through the artwork.
I see.
Now, Cam Kennedy is a good artist. His artwork is very stylized, as you can see.
And gorgeously detailed.
Yes, very, 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 very cluttered. I get. What I like about Cam Kennedy is George Lucas set out to create a used universe. Cam Kennedy captured the used look to a T, in my opinion. Nothing in the book looks brand new and fresh. It looks like the world has been lived in.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So,
So a
are
question.
you looking to
There's
see?
a certain page that I was looking for, and I don't know if I'll be able to find it. Something that was a challenge for me is trying to tell where I was supposed to look first.
Okay.
Since I'm used to reading left to right, for example, on a page that shows caption, dialogue, do I go in this
Yeah,
order?
usually,
Do I go back and forth?
if you've got a full page like that, top to bottom is usually your best bet at that point.
Okay,
If the words are going across, top to bottom kind of helps.
got it. The other
So-
thing that all caps, I know that's the traditional font.
That's the traditional font.
It,
yeah.
and that's just not my
And everyone's shouting their stuff.
exclamation points
That's
all
right.
the time.
That's
Everyone's
right.
and they're all speaking rather swarthily with the
That's-
clenched jaw and the. "Arr."
That's right.
So the bold font
Shout even louder.
and some of them seem to be like the name of someone is in bold, and in my experience, bold means emphasized or louder.
Right.
So I had some cognitive dissonance there, trying to not apply the traditional definition of bold
Sure.
to this.
Sure. That makes sense.
Right.
I meant bold, I think, is just to have things stand out to the reader as they're reading it.
Oh,
but
okay. So
I honestly, because they're already, it looks like they're already shouting all their sentences anyways when you
Yes.
read a comic. Unless you're used to reading them like I am, but everything ends with an exclamation mark almost all the time.
Right.
So everybody's always shouting, but
Right.
the bold, I think, is just to have things stand out.
That makes sense.
Is my guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to look at the specific instance.
Got it.
Okay.
Can I add more about the?
Absolutely.
So regarding the artwork, I thought it was incredibly talented. I even love, since I had a complete crush on Luke Skywalker all through episodes 4, 5, 6, and I will say a little bit 7, 8, 9, and of course Han Solo. I thought they did a beautiful job of really portraying this is what they looked like in the film. So if you're a film fan like I am, you recognize.
You
even on
recognize
the
the
cover,
character.
there's Mark Hamill. Now that said,
Han Solo looked a little
a
younger.
little piratey.
He looked a little younger to me in the book. Luke looked like
Yeah.
he was aged. Leia looked like he was aged. Han looked even younger.
And Lando looked a little bit accurate, but yeah, Han looked a little.
He was off.
He was a bit of a bodice ripper on
Yes.
the cover. Yeah.
Yeah.
This was hard for me to reconcile with the Luke that I knew.
Okay.
He looked very eyeliner emo.
Yes.
To me.
I think I think in that case, Cam Kennedy was just trying to portray a mood.
Yes.
The Luke was in a dark place.
Sure.
He was. I mean,
Which,
the whole story
yeah.
is very dark.
Right.
Hence
and,
the title Dark Empire.
yeah, and I think he did that well. I think that if you only had comics and you'd never seen the films, you would have a gorgeous story unfolding in your mind.
Right.
I think that was enjoyable.
Yeah. So, well, speaking about Luke, what did you think about when he first appeared? I don't know if you remember his first appearance in the book. There was a silhouette. It looked.
Oh yes, just that shadowy.
It looked a little bit like his father in the silhouette. His father in the costume, right?
Okay, that's
Yeah.
cleverly done. I'll have to go back and see if I picked up on that. I think the arc of having Luke struggling with his
while you're
yes,
doing that, I
yeah,
can go show you.
I think the story arc of Luke struggling with his dark side fit exactly where it would fit between episodes 6 and 7 anyway.
Right.
And that he does eventually head out and isolate himself.
There's Luke, his first appearance.
That does look just like Vader.
Yes.
Okay, that's clever.
And that was done on purpose.
That is beautifully done.
Now they more overtly do something similar when he comes and visits Leia for the first time when she's on Pinnacle Base, where it is Vader, and Leia even says Vader or father or something like that.
Right.
And then ultimately it ends up being Luke that's visiting her.
Got it.
So a lot of this is foreshadowing of things to come.
Well, it's foreshadowing, and I also think that it dips in really nicely, and this is where my literature background, I think, embraces Lucas's vision. His whole embracing of the Joseph Campbell hero of 1,000 faces, the dualities, the archetypes, the hero's quest, it captures that dualities. I used to use Star Wars as examples with my classes all the time.
Right.
Of a hero has a dark side, that ambivalence back and forth, and that he's always struggling, trying to overcome those darkness urges on the inside. I think that just makes the story that much richer for me. I used to tell my students that it's those underlying thematic motifs that a level of a story, you could read the comic at face value and go, what a fantastic story. Loved it. Same thing with the films. But when you know underneath what, like that little Easter egg that the artist dropped for you, most people won't catch it. But if you do, that's a little tidbit from the creator to the audience. It's like, did you catch that little tiny thing I put in there? And so you just get that much more textured of an experience.
Right.
And I think that just is fantastic.
And that, so I thought it was a fantastic introduction to Luke. I mean, it was like, at first you look and you're like, wait, is that Vader? Did Vader just show up?
It's in episode, or in Empire, when he sees his own face in the mask, when he's out with Yoda. So if you've seen both film and this, they mirror each other in the that duality motif that you pick up on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was your overall impression. Now we'll go into some specifics about the character progressions over time and stuff and that. But what was it? Just so these people understand, what was it that you liked about this book?
What I liked about the book is I always love reading another story, and I'm such a Star Wars fan anyway. I'm already open to it. Had you given me a graphic novel of a genre or of a storyline that I'm not familiar
Spider-Man.
with, right, I might not have gotten into it as much.
Sure.
And of course, the little very thin dime comics from when I was a kid were all kinds of fun. So I was sort of a blank slate, but almost leaning towards, I think I will enjoy it.
Right.
I love the artwork. I thought the drawings were beautiful. The dialogue made me chuckle, only in the sense of George Lucas even admitted in his films, you're not watching this movie for the dialogue.
No, you were not.
The dialogue is not great.
Sure.
I love you. I know. I mean, that's pretty cheesy.
Right.
But it's iconic. So these writers stayed continuous to that kind of writing.
Right.
Which is what it needed to do. Even the, I don't remember the kind of creature that Sebulba was in episode 1. The Doug. The dialogue was exactly right. So I could hear it in my head. He would have said things just like that. And Akbar, and I've forgotten another one of the names, but and the droid beeps and boops, and C-3PO's dialogue was exactly how he would have talked.
Okay.
And even Chewie's.
So
I enjoyed the dialogue because I thought it was very true to what, for me, is the absolute touchstone for Star Wars, which is the film. So I really loved that. I also, going back to, it made you use your imagination to have that story unfold in your mind.
Right.
There are a lot of people who say a book with pictures is for children. And this changed my mind on that.
Okay. Well, that's actually good then.
It is.
Okay. That's great.
I think they're married together so beautifully, you can't have one without the other. And it took me longer to read than I thought. I would have guessed that a comic would be something you sort of flip through, but it's not that.
You haven't read a modern comic.
It's not that at all.
They're less dense. They're a lot quicker. That's kind of why I like the Dark Horse era a lot, because they're a lot more dense in the storytelling.
It is, and you could go back and reread this multiple times and pick up more things, more nuance, more details. I loved the immersive experience that it made me have, because I'm hearing voices of characters I know,
right,
but I'm creating voices for characters I'm just meeting.
being introduced. Yep.
But they all seemed to fit.
Sure.
And that's where, because I'm such a purist with the films, that I want everything to fit the original episodes 4, 5, 6. And I think it did that beautifully. Okay,
good. So let's talk about what you didn't like about the comic.
And it's not that I didn't like it, it's that it was hard for me to, like, reading in all caps. And the exclamation points. And the trying to figure out, I like getting lost in a story, and it took me a little while to get lost because I was trying to figure out what to read next.
Gotcha.
But then once I fell into the habit of it, and I'm sure people who read them more than I do don't remember what it was like to not know how to read what's next. So if I read more of them, I would get it more easily, more readily.
Okay.
So that was probably the hardest part, was the format. The other thing that I did fret about was, because I'm such a fan of the films, and I was so nervous for episodes 7, 8, and 9 to come out because I wanted them to be so good. I thought they were amazing. And I remember going to the theater with you for episode 9, and when all of a sudden Palpatine is back, and I'm like, in the theater, and I came out, and I'm like, run! And you said, I knew that. Everyone knows that who's read the comic. I'm like, well why would they do that?
It's not so much that we knew he was coming back in episode 9. It's just, it's not a shock for those of us that have read the comics, because it was done before. Obviously, you read this comic. I read this comic when it was coming out in 91. So when the Emperor showed up in the movie, I'm like,
did you remember that?
Oh yeah. I remember all the comics I read.
Well, that's probably true.
So for me, are you kidding? This Star Wars is injected in my veins.
That's true.
Of course, I remember that.
So the question that I had when I was reading this, of knowing that any film studio needs a movie, especially such expensive films to make.
Right.
I don't know what the millions of dollars it took to make each of 7, 8, and 9, but it was in the teens of millions at least.
Yeah, it was in the hundreds of millions.
Okay, so huge. They, for as much as they want to put their creative vision out there, they need it to make money.
Yes.
They need people to buy tickets to go see it.
Right.
My fear when I saw this was, wait a minute. They gave those plot points away 25 years ago? How were they not shooting themselves in the foot of no one's going to want to go see episode 9 if they already know Palpatine's back?
Right. Okay, so, there's a lot to unpack there, Rachel. So first of all, this story that you read from Dark Horse, it's not considered part of Disney's continuity. It's not. Everything prior to 2014 was thrown out. All the stories that were written prior to 2014, gone.
And everybody was okay with that.
They didn't exist. No, not everybody was okay with that. There are people that are still upset to it to this day. In fact, I suspect a lot of the backlash against new Disney product has to do with the fact that they threw out the old content. Plus, there's been some comments by the heads of Disney where they say they don't really have any, unlike Marvel, where they can draw on the comics to do their story. Well, Disney does have the ability to draw on the comics. Lucasfilm has the ability to draw on comics and previous stories for their new stories. And it's clear to those of us that have read this, and now probably clear to you,
Right.
They actually did draw on the comics for the new movies. The sequels clearly borrowed from Dark Empire.
So Tom Veitch works for, or at the time worked for, Lucasfilm?
Okay. So when Dark Empire was first conceived, Tom Veitch conceived it 2 or 3 years prior to it being published. The license was owned by Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics had published the original Star Wars series. They had done droids and Ewoks, but I believe the last droid or Ewok comic came out in 1986. Okay. So this was conceived in either 88 or 89, because the book was published in 91. He went to Marvel and said, "Hey, I have an idea for a story," and Marvel would have published it. They even solicited it, but they never did publish it. So Dark Horse picked up the license in the meantime for Star Wars, because Dark Horse is a real small company, indie company. And they were making some headway with their stuff. They were publishing Godzilla. They were publishing other licensed products. So they picked up Star Wars and decided to publish it. And at that point, Tom Veitch would have been working with Lucasfilm. He's not in a vacuum. Lucasfilm will definitely be with the writers and even the artists, I'm sure, at some level, communicating with them on what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do.
And George Lucas was still there then.
George Lucas would have been there. Now, whether or not George Lucas was directly involved or if it was an executive at Lucasfilm that approved the story, but I do know in this case George Lucas was there. George liked this story. In fact, I think he definitely approved the story. My recollection is he definitely approved the story. He liked the story. There was no notion at the time, and I get where you're going with this. There was no notion at the time in 91 that they were going to publish it or they were going to create any new movies.
George is saying, sounds great, have fun with it, let's make a comic.
It wasn't sounds great. I'm sure there were and this definitely hardened as the years went on. There were things where they say, you can do this, but you can't bring back Vader. Vader died in Return of the Jedi. And I believe that was one of the things with this story. I believe, and again, Rachel, you got to understand, I'm going from memory here, but I believe that originally we were going to bring back Vader. And they said, no, you can't bring back Vader. Okay, well then how about if we bring back the Emperor? Sure, you can bring back the Emperor.
Okay.
So there was that kind of dialogue going on with Lucasfilm on what they could and couldn't do. So that definitely occurs. So at that point, does Tom Veitch work for Lucasfilm? Yeah, he does, right? I mean, he's working with their in-house talent, making decisions on what he can and can't do in his story. Now he goes off and writes a story, turns in an outline, turns in the completed. I'm sure Cam Kennedy turns in completed pages. There are people at Lucasfilm that are reviewing that, going, "Yeah, we don't like this panel. You got to change this," or "We don't like this plot point. You gotta change that because we may reserve that for the future." That occurs a lot more today than it did back in 1991. I promise you, if they knew they were going to make the sequel movies, they would not have probably approved this one.
Because they didn't want to let the cat out of the bag.
They wouldn't have let the cat out of the bag. If they knew they were going to bring back the Emperor, they wouldn't have done it in the comics.
So then, as a follow-up, just thinking about logistics and intellectual property, and if I'm Tom Veitch working for/with Lucasfilms, is his name somewhere in the credits on episode 9 as it goes, like original story by? Does he own any?
I don't think they would have done that. No, I don't think they would have done that because everything is accredited to George Lucas himself. Original characters by
Now,
Lucas.
I love
George
Lucas
owns the property, or owned the property. Now it's probably Disney, but...
And I love him so deeply. But did he cheat on using someone else's idea for these blockbuster films? George Lucas, if you are watching this, I still love you very, very much. I mean, no disrespect. But this guy's the one who thought of it, and Lucasfilms goes, cool.
Well, okay, yeah.
And then they make $1 zillion from someone else's idea.
Yeah, but the way they look at it, it's their property.
Because he wrote it for them.
When he wrote it for them, they own that material.
And he knew that, so
every
okay.
artist and writer that works for these for big companies like Marvel or Disney or stuff, they know that property is owned by them.
Okay,
yes.
Then I feel better about that.
So yeah,
okay.
So that's the thing. There was another book coming out in addition to the comic in '91, Heir to the Empire, the Timothy Zahn trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
They had to reconcile Dark Empire with what Timothy Zahn was putting in his Thrawn trilogy.
Duel at Dawn? How do they decide whose writer
they
gets to prevail?
Actually my understanding is they asked Tom Veitch and Timothy Zahn to work it out so that these two stories
lock them in a room together,
so the two stories coexist in the same universe. Yeah, lock them in a room and whoever comes out. Yeah, I'm not sure they pulled it off 100%, but you know what? I'm able to reconcile it in my mind that things can coexist. It's very strange.
Yeah.
In Timothy Zahn's universe, there's a new republic. The galaxy is the Alliance has won against the Empire. There's some Imperial remnants, but for the most part, the heroes are running the galaxy now. In Dark Empire, it's very clear
that it was a minimal victory. It's
a very minimal victory. In fact, they say at the beginning of this that the Republic did take over for a little while, and now the Empire has come back and they're controlling 3/4 of the galaxy. And they actually explain that this takes place 5 years after Return of the Jedi.
Right.
It's clear to me when I read the comic, and I don't know if it was clear to you, that this did not take place. That when they wrote this, when they thought of this, when they were putting this on paper, it felt a little bit closer to the end of Return of the Jedi than 5 years later. At the end of the day, Dark Empire has its detractors because of that. It is hard to reconcile what you're reading in these pages versus what you're reading in the books.
Sure. That said, though, you're looking at two philosophical differences on what makes a good war story.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the end of World War II, for example, you don't have, a historian would say there were more pockets than you'd think of, but a decisive Allied victory wipes out, the Nazi regime,
right,
and all nice and tidy.
Right.
This, I think, has a more realistic, messy ending of when episode 6 ends. Because, like in modern day politics, there's always back and forth and back and forth. One wins momentarily, but there's still pockets here and there. And to me, that sort of vision, which might be sort of why it prevailed, is it just gives countless opportunities for more stories.
Yes.
If you have a decisive victory where the good guys won and it's all buttoned up,
then there's
no more story.
There's not much interesting things left to tell.
Right. Yeah, because you have to have conflict for there to be story.
Especially in a galaxy based off Star Wars. Yeah. So that makes sense. When Marvel published their last comic book I think it was '86, and then both Bantam Books and Dark Horse picked up the license and start publishing new material. Mm-hmm. There was an RPG that came out at the time, role-playing game.
Okay.
And so there was, and I'm sure there was other stuff. I'm just not sure it was prevalent. It wasn't. I don't think we had cereal boxes. Because remember back at the peak, there were C-3PO cereal. And,
I do, and lunch boxes.
And Dixie cups with Star Wars characters on it, and I had Underoos with
but
with characters on it.
Between 83 and 91. If your kid wanted a Star Wars party, you could get the merchandise.
Yeah, there was definitely merchandise.
And you could always, there was never a Halloween where you couldn't get Star Wars costumes.
That's probably true.
And
Yeah, I will 100% agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Star Wars never went away for a lot of people.
Right.
So, okay. What did you think about the state of the galaxy? And we kind of encroached on this a little bit with the earlier discussion. What did you think about the state of the galaxy when the book began?
I think it's realistic
Okay.
that there wouldn't be a decisive victory,
Mm-hmm.
and for as huge as the galaxy was,
Right.
there is no way that one victory on Endor was going to
Topple the Empire.
Right.
Right.
It was too vast. It was too big. It had fingers in pies all over
Right.
the entire galaxy. So I don't think it would be realistic to have had it all easily end.
Right.
Plus, the story arc that began with Luke, where he's battling that inner dark side,
Mm-hmm.
that would have just vanished.
Right.
By starting, it's not until episode 6 that Leia even discovers that she's Vader's daughter. For that to have completely tied up everything being finished with that, also
Sure.
unrealistic. So I love that this explored not only the Han and Leia marriage,
Mm-hmm.
but the Luke battling his inner demons,
Sure.
but also the galaxy itself is still in turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
Take any election. You don't have as soon as a winner is declared in an election, you don't have half the country go, all right then,
Sure.
so we're fine. There's always going to be that overlapping and residual strife
Mm-hmm.
that wouldn't be resolved yet. So I thought it was very realistic in showing that there were still so many unresolved conflicts.
Sure. Okay. And you did kind of talk about the character progression. Luke's in a different state than he was at the end of Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I do remember him just as a teenager watching the films,
Mhm.
that he's such a young character in episode 1. You almost have a perfect, or not 1, 4. You have a perfect Bildungsroman, the journey story from 4 to 6.
are you speaking English?
Bildungsroman. Like To Kill a Mockingbird is a story of a young kid who then grows, learns, older and wiser at the end. There are quite a few stories like that, and 4, 5, 6 were a perfect one. But he's just hitting the beginning of his, now I don't know where do I go from here. He doesn't look happy at the end of episode 6. He looks determined that there is much more work to be done.
Sure.
So I think this extrapolates that particular characteristic
Right.
and runs with it.
Okay.
Which is
and
intriguing.
speaking about Luke, there was one thing I forgot to mention earlier. We talked about the iconic moment when he shows up in the page, looking his silhouette, looking like Vader. What did you think about his battle against that AT-AT on Imperial City, by the way, which was an interesting name for the planet. The planet was
Yes.
what they called Imperial Planet, and the city was Imperial City. Clearly, it's meant to be Coruscant.
Right.
This was before they had that name, or I think maybe Timothy Zahn had put it in his book, but it hadn't yet propagated out to everything.
Right.
So when he battles the AT-AT,
When he's able to use the Force against the AT-AT.
yeah, a little bit of a
It's-
power creep.
Well, a little bit of when all of a sudden Yoda in the films could battle like a Jedi, but in episodes 4, 5, and 6 he had been enfeebled. You're like, can we really do that? I guess I would question, if the Force could have been used for that, why was it not used for that earlier? But then I'm comparing it to the films, in which George Lucas is limited by whatever special effects
Yeah, there is
availability that he
definitely a
had.
limitation. Yeah,
Sure. So I think this tracks perfectly with the current iteration of films, but it almost seemed too good to be true of a Deus Ex Machina, of that machine of the gods, of the everyone's in a tricky place. But
Right.
wait, I am Batman. It turns out I do have a grappling hook.
Right.
Like, you didn't have that before.
So, and there were a lot of parallels, and you can see where they borrowed this for the sequel trilogy.
Yes.
Yes.
And isn't there a bit where Leia wants to use the Force against the fighters, and Han or no, Han wants her to use the Force, and she says that's not what the Force.
That's not what the Force is used for. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's just a question that I would have of, but if you can do that, why don't we always do that?
Yes.
But then where would the story be?
Where would the story be?
Right.
Yeah, you got to save those for the
Sure.
right time.
Exactly. We can't just hit the nuclear button
impact,
on
yeah.
everything. Mm-hmm.
So, and Leia, her progression from where she left off on Return of the Jedi to here?
Now, see, what's fun about that one is this makes her. It fills in the gaps between Leia in a bronze bikini and General Organa
Right.
that you see later.
Right.
If all you saw was the films, you don't know how that happened because
Right.
she was treated in 1977 through 83 the way film women were.
Yeah.
I know
She was a stronger character than most film women.
She was, but I think Carrie Fisher even gave interviews where she said, "I can't believe I let them
Put me in a bikini.
put me in a bikini like that." But she said, she was young and she didn't know, and of course the world was different then.
Sure.
But then we hit the modern era of warrior princess women, and so to see her evolve from that to that, if only the only input you ever had were the films, as I have, there's a huge gap, and this helps address that.
Okay.
And even in episode, I think it was 7 or 8, when Rey is training with Leia, and she's
9.
running all that in 9, okay,
Yeah.
and she's running that training course, and we start hearing little snippets of, Leia is a Jedi in her own right. We just never saw them in the films. This helps fill that.
in. Yes.
Of she was kind of a badass.
Yeah.
and-
She clearly had the training, but what was weird to me in the book is she didn't have the lightsaber. And she got a lightsaber. Do you remember?
Yes, there are 3 roles of the female in Joseph Campbell's archetype. She can be the princess to be one, she can be the wisdom giver, or she can be a guide. And a guide often shows up as an old female crone who has some sort of a magic talisman to give our hero. And you see
Right.
that through the entire Star Wars stories. You see it all the time. I love that Leia moves from being a princess to a wisdom giver.
Vima gave Leia the lightsaber, but Leia also came into possession of another device during the course of the comic.
The holocron.
The holocron, right. And she stole that from the Emperor the first time, actually the second time they go to rescue Luke. So what did you think about the holocron?
I think, you said Disney was owned by Marvel at this time, or no?
Marvel's owned by Disney.
Were they at the time of this writing?
No.
Oh,
No,
I
at the
thought it was on-
at the time of this writing, Marvel was bought by Disney sometime in the 2010s, and
Got it.
Lucasfilm was bought by Disney sometime in the 2010s.
I thought perhaps I was seeing this fantastic crossover of the Infinity Stones and the holocron.
yeah, no,
and
no.
then Harry Potter and the Horcruxes. But even though, no, of course, that's not a crossover, it is an archetypal motif often that there is some device, some mystical item that no one entirely knows what it is or what it's for, but it's greatly sought after. I think that's a really interesting literary technique that the writers used.
Yes, it's so what the holocrons are for the viewers who most of them I'm going to guess already know. But what the holocrons are they're a way for the Jedi of the past to capture their feelings on things and interact with Jedi, the current generation of Jedi. Now, Sith do it as well. What's fascinating is it's very similar. If you ever watch Superman.
Right.
When Superman's father leaves him the crystals that he sticks in the Fortress of Solitude, and he's able to communicate with his dad, and it's like, wait, how's this possible? Same kind of technology. I mean, it works the same way. Jedi are able to ask current Jedi are able to ask past Jedi questions, and they actually get answers. And Leia gets some answers in the book. When she takes the holocron, she takes it back to Pinnacle Base with her, and she's consulting with the holocron. The holocron does give her some answers about the future with her and Luke, possible future. Obviously, nothing's set in stone in the Star Wars universe, but a possible future with her and Luke.
Right. I thought that was interesting. I love the literary richness to adding in what is often called a MacGuffin into a story. That little thing that is sought after. Of in Episode 4, it was R2 and the Death Star plans, and then there have been lightsabers that have been a MacGuffin, or different characters.
The Wayfinder, the Waypoint in the ninth movie.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think it's really fascinating to watch a really intelligent writer, a clever writer who knows all of those literary devices to put in. Here's Leia, who would otherwise be quite possibly at a dead end. She has to be given some information, not so much that it's like Galadriel giving the light to Frodo.
Right.
You get a bit of something where you don't entirely know what it's for, you don't know entirely what the answer is that you're getting, but it helps open paths so that it intrigues the reader to see if the character is going to know what to do with it.
Yeah, it gives Leia the impetus to actually go and, for the third time,
go back,
try to rescue her brother. So that was interesting. Okay, so another main character that was in the story was Han Solo. So what did you think about how Han Solo progressed from the last movie to this story and then through this story?
Well, not until you and I were speaking today that I understood, wait a second, the number of children Han and Leia have is different in this iteration than it is in the films.
That's correct.
So when they were talking about the children, I thought, wait, I only remember there being the one son they have, Ben, who becomes Kylo Ren. So I got a tiny bit confused there on how long they'd been married, were there other children I didn't know about, and where does Ben fit into the whole thing. But now that I understand that, I love that you've got this wonderful mix of he's still the rascal that he was, and he's still the sort of space cowboy. He's rough around the edges. He's got nefarious friends that it's such a almost a trope of the husband has some ne'er-do-well old buddies that the wife is not entirely sure about, but they're good at heart. They're just kind of
right. And she even mentions she doesn't like his friends. I think she mentions specifically his girlfriend,
right?
His ex-girlfriend,
Salla. Yes. That I think you've got a nice mix of the kind of man he's maturing into, still mixed with the rascal that he was.
Yes. And actually, Legends Han is a lot different than Canon Han. Canon Han, by the time the sequels come out, it feels like his character digresses to what he was before he met Luke and Leia.
Okay.
He's back to smuggling and doing the things that he was doing prior to meeting them.
Right.
Whereas Han in Legend, he does become a family man, and he's there for his kids, and he's just different. Or at least that's how it struck me when I saw the sequel trilogies.
True.
Yeah.
I think he adds into there's a whole father-son motif that pervades the entire universe. Whether you've got Vader and Luke, you've got then Han and Leia and their kids. I thought it was really interesting that they now open up the genre or the type to the father-daughter with Vader and Leia, which is why I was rooting for Rey to be Luke's daughter. Because I thought, maybe we're ready to embrace beyond father-son, move into father-daughter. And so again, with this book, I had to let go of what I knew of Han in the Han and Ben, Han and Kylo Ren, and embrace just what's in here. But I still thought it was interesting.
Yes. And Palpatine tells Leia that she's pregnant. Presumably she knew. It wasn't clear for me from the story if she knew or it was a shock to her when Palpatine told her. The third child is Anakin Skywalker. Her first two children with Han are Jason and Jaina.
And in this story, they're safe on planet somewhere.
Presumably
they're
on
being
Pinnacle
taken
Base.
care
Yeah, Leia has I believe it's a childhood friend named Winter who does a lot of mother surrogation.
Okay.
She's a surrogate mother for the kids while Leia's off doing her
of. Well, as one must
adventures.
if one is a general.
Not that Leia doesn't spend a lot of time with her kids. Her and Han absolutely do in Legend, but there's this other character that steps in named Winter who looks a lot like Leia actually, but she weird. But she steps in and takes care of her kids when she's not around. So presumably the two of them are with the kids. None of the kids are named in the story. They just mentioned you have two kids, and then Palpatine tells her, and by the way, you're pregnant with another.
One.
Yeah. So he recognizes that. What about the conflict? Han struck me as being very bitter whenever he confronted Luke. I mean, the first time Luke shows up, he didn't seem as bitter, but definitely by the time they go to rescue him, the second time, he struck me as being a very bitter gentleman.
And he mentions that he's been doing this all along. If he's such a great Jedi, why do I keep rescuing him?
That's right.
I think that shows how far into family man he's become, that he is ferociously protective of Leia, even against her own brother. If he feels that there are any adversaries against what he's got behind him as his own, he will fight to the death no matter who it is, even if it's his oldest and dearest friend.
Yeah,
and her brother.
And there's actually a scene in there which a lot of the times they contrast Luke with his father Vader and how his father reacted to things. And there's a scene where Luke is actually holding Han by the neck, feet dangling, very similar to Captain Antilles on board the Tantive 4, and Luke's holding him very similar to that, but clearly not with the intent to kill him, but more with the intent of, hey, I've got things in control. Please leave me alone. So that was Han. So we talked about Vima. You did mention Han's other friends, and the two that have a lot of story are Shug, Nix, and Sala, his ex-girlfriend. So what did you think about Shug? Or Nix. I guess we should call him Nix. What did you think about Nix?
I liked him. I thought he was almost if Han had not taken the path that he'd taken way back at the beginning, then someone once called him the world's most adventurous Uber driver, which is basically what he was. If he hadn't done that, then he would have been exactly like Nix is or was. It's almost showing the path not taken, that this is exactly the kind of rough around the edges smuggler, rough guy that
Han the grease monkey. He owns a repair shop for spaceships. Yes.
Yeah, I liked him a lot. I like that he is the friend who can't get involved, that reluctant hero. Can't get involved, does get involved. And him and Sala both have an opportunity to just leave Han and Leia on Biss when they take them to Biss, and they chose to actually come back against pretty good odds. I mean, bad odds for them, but against great odds. Sure, and I do like the whether it's Veitch or George Lucas, whomever is in charge of those characters, there's a perfect blend, I think, in the universe, realistically, of some are like, is it Maka?
Maka, yes.
Who is
the one who turned him in.
Turned him in, right. So he's got looks like a friend but betrays.
Right.
Looks like they aren't going to get involved but is there till the bitter end. So he does a nice combination of, there are both sorts in the galaxy, and so you get a mix. And what's nice about that is you never know at the very beginning when you meet a character which one it's going to be. Always keeps you on your toes.
Right.
Is someone going to be a betrayer or an ally?
Yeah, and Maka ends up being the Lando of the story. The Empire Strikes Back Lando, the one who turns his friend in.
Right.
And which leads us to the next major appearance, which was Boba Fett.
Oh, Boba Fett. When I first read that in here, I was like, okay, hang on a second. And again, until you and I spoke, I didn't know how much the modern films and modern TV series dipped into old stuff, or if someone just pulled that out of the hat I'm like, wait a minute. I watched him fall into the pit.
Right.
What do you mean he survived? How is he back there? And then, again, the same question I'd had before of, but if they're going to write the book of Boba Fett in 2023, why did they give it away that he had made it? But now I understand how they didn't know that series was ever going to get made.
Yeah.
So modern storytellers are going back to the well of ideas
Right.
from before. You have to take a suspension of disbelief leap with anything in science fiction
Right.
anyway. So,
Well,
if a lightsaber can be given to an old Jedi and she's got it in the basement and she goes, "This was given to me," if I buy that, I should buy that Boba Fett in his fantastic Mandalorian armor could survive
yes.
the pit.
And Boba is joined by a fellow bounty hunter, Dengar, who was also from the movies. Very briefly seen on the bridge of the Star Destroyer when Vader was debriefing him on capturing our heroes. I found it funny because Boba Fett's a fan favorite.
Sure.
Clearly, The Mandalorian wouldn't have been made if Boba Fett wasn't popular.
Right.
The Boba Fett series wouldn't have been made if Boba Fett wasn't popular. But they handle Boba Fett exactly how they handle him in The Return of the Jedi.
With just a little bit of a comic edge.
With yeah, he doesn't have a great send off in this story either, right? So as he's following them down to the surface abyss, the shield closes. His ship hits the shield, and he careens off into space.
Now, in your opinion, do you think the lighthearted, almost the slip on a banana peel bit that's given to Boba Fett opens the door to eventually 20 years after this, 30 years, they come up with the idea for the Mandalorian where he's essentially a babysitter?
Well,
and there's some comic elements with Grogu that do you think they were going back to the original, let's give a little bit of humanity to a bounty hunter?
Well, yeah. Boba Fett for Lucasfilm is a moneymaker. So he's a fan favorite whenever he features in something, or if they give him a action figure or something, it sells very well.
Right.
And in fact, since Mandalorian has come out, we've had a plethora of just a flood of toys and things with the Mandalorian images on it. So I don't know that this story had any impact on any of the stuff that's happening today, so much as when he was seen on film in Empire Strikes Back, he was a cool character, right? I mean, didn't talk much, got the job done, taking Han back to Jabba.
Yeah.
Return of the Jedi did turn him in a little bit of a comedic element, and then this story followed the same path. Now, having Boba appear, I feel, was important because it compelled our characters to leave quickly instead of having them languish on Nar Hutta, the smuggler's moon.
Right.
They needed a ship to get into the Imperial territory. The Empire is back to ruling 3/4 of the galaxy. They needed a ship to get into the heart of the Imperial territory. Smugglers are being used by the Empire at this point to rebuild their war machine. So they had a ship, Sala's ship, that they were able to take into the heart of the Empire, and so Boba Fett just kind of sped that along. That's kind of a trope of Star Wars, right? You never linger on any one location. I mean, I think Dagobah we lingered, but it felt like we lingered in that movie more so than other planets and scenes. But generally, we see something, and it's out. We're off, and we're on to the next thing. And Boba Fett helped speed things along. So he was there just to propel them, to get them. They get to the planet, get them down to the planet quickly, and then he's gone. And so it was an interesting use of the character. That leaves us with the big bad of the story, Emperor Palpatine himself. So what did you feel about his use in the story?
I remember when I was absolutely gobsmacked in the theater, and you could just hear the whole theater in the most recent 3 when all of a sudden the Emperor's back. I'm like,
Right.
what? And I couldn't believe it. And I thought it was fantastic storytelling. I loved it.
Right.
And then I came out of the theater with you, and I said, "Ron!" And you're like, "I know. Everyone who reads the comics knows that." I'm like,
Well,
"Well, why would you?" So
yeah. It wasn't so much that we knew he was going to return in that movie. It was that it wasn't a surprise when we did see it, because he had done it here in the comic,
Right.
in Dark Empire.
So my sticking spot when I very first read this, before we talked, is that I didn't understand why a movie studio, in needing to have a big recoup of filming expense,
Right.
the whole thing comes down to bottom line. They want to make money off of the film, and I couldn't understand why, if spoilers are under wraps and scripts are burned as soon as someone reads them, and they send alternate
Right.
endings to the actors so no one knows, and it's so hush hush, but the cat's already out of the bag. Why would they have burned movie tickets?
Sure.
Because someone who knows the comic, knows the story, wouldn't go see the movie. Then realizing, okay, maybe that's not the case, but that stopped me for a bit.
Yeah. They again, when this book was written, I don't think there was any intent to bring Star Wars back to theaters. I believe we can attribute Tom Veitch's story here and Timothy Zahn's story to kickstarting a new era of Star Wars, which ultimately led to Lucas making the decision, hey, you know what? There's still some demand here.
Yeah.
Let's make some more movies.
So do you think George Lucas, either he himself or all of Lucasfilms, owes a debt of gratitude to these guys?
I would say the relationship between Lucasfilm and the fans is symbiotic. Lucasfilm wouldn't be, or Disney wouldn't be what they are today without the fans, and Tom Veitch and Timothy Zahn, these guys that kept things alive, clearly fans, because
Right.
they weren't just guns for hire. They had a deep love for the lore here, or we wouldn't get good material like this. So I think it's Lucasfilm obviously got the thing. Lucas got the ball rolling. The fans kept it alive during the dark period when there was not a lot of material coming out. Kind of brought it back with new material, because my understanding is Lucasfilm didn't go to these guys. Tom Veitch had this idea. Timothy Zahn had his idea. Now, Timothy Zahn may or may not have had the idea to write a Star Wars story. That Lucasfilm may have approached them, but Tom Veitch definitely had this idea. And then clearly Lucasfilm benefited from the fact that, hey, there's some interest here, and things snowballed from there.
So that brings up a question that I had of monetizing an idea. Is Tom Veitch listed in the credits for whichever episode brings back
Absolutely
Palpatine?
not. Lucas will get credit for creating the situations, the characters in the universe. Tom Veitch, at the end of the day, even though he came up with this story, he is work for hire. I mean, he is working on somebody else's property, and you just understand when you work on somebody else's property, you don't own that property.
Okay.
Now, if he had whole cloth created any characters or situations or anything without having that consultation with Lucasfilm, there may be a chance they might attribute something to him. But I don't think I've ever seen Lucasfilm themselves do that. I've seen that happen with Marvel Comics where an artist or a writer will get some credit for helping create a character. But at the end of the day,
Stanley is Stanley.
Stanley's dead though. But Marvel is Marvel, and they own that material.
Okay.
Lock, stock, and barrel, and it's almost an afterthought that they give credit to these writers. Actually, the writers and artists have had to go through a lot over the years to get credit for doing these things.
So Tom is fine. He's not, Bob Cratchit scratching out on a desk.
I do not believe that would be the case.
Okay.
I think he's fine.
As long as he's being
I'm sure he was paid,
commensurate.
and I believe he would still get royalties from
Oh,
every
okay.
every copy of Dark Empire that sells.
Okay. So
Don't
I
know
went,
what the check looks like, but I'm sure he's still getting royalties from doing the work.
well, that was where I went down kind of a side road, completely out of story, going, hold on.
Right.
How is the modern studio making money off of somebody else's idea a long time
Well,
ago? It just has sort of a
The
David
studio
and Goliath.
owns the brand, the
I-
property.
yeah, I
They
get
could-
that now.
They can totally shut this down if they didn't want this story to be made.
That is true.
So it's yeah, it's
Okay, so that's
it's a
just-
necessary evil for a brand like Star Wars.
That's fair. That's fair. So back to the character itself, I thought it was a really interesting turn because someone as powerful as Palpatine is not going to meet his final end just by getting tipped over a balcony.
That's correct.
They had to end it that way at the end of episode 6,
Mm-hmm.
only because that's as far as George Lucas ever thought he was going to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, he had inklings of he had other story ideas and stuff, but at that point he was done with Star Wars. He was
Got
he
it.
was wrapping his story up, and if there was never going to be another one, this has to have a conclusion.
Sure.
So
And also that helps. That movie tied everything off with a bow,
yes,
so to speak. It did make me laugh when I watched Solo, when all of a sudden here's Darth Maul back again. Like,
Oh,
nope,
yeah.
I saw him go down a hole, and we saw Boba Fett go down a hole. So the rule in Star Wars is if your death anywhere is portrayed as you fell down a hole,
right.
you're coming back.
Yeah, and
You are not dead.
and you should always ask me if you want the complete story, because Darth Maul came back before Solo.
Of course, of course. Well, that was the first time I saw him.
Okay.
So I thought the Palpatine return is, once I got past the financial questions that I had and the spoiler questions, I think it opened up a whole new range of plot possibilities,
Yes.
which is interesting.
So you're of the opinion his quote death at the end of this story is not as
Well, apparently
Final
nobody dies.
Nobody-
No one ever dies.
well. That's not true. Darth Vader did not come back in this
Well, is there a branch of comics that even you haven't discovered yet?
story. No.
Maybe.
Nice try.
Maybe Larry
Not-
in
not a-
Wichita is scratching out a story.
Not a chance. Yeah, Lucasfilm was very clear when this book came out that Darth Vader was not to be used.
Now, will you sprinkle some hope on my poor Han Solo heart? Because if we're going with anybody who falls off the edge of something never really dies, maybe Han.
It's that's always possible. The problem you have with Han Solo is the actor
That's true. Harrison Ford
has
said.
been wanting this character to
Yeah.
die since Return of the Jedi.
That's true. And I will throw all of my Han Solo stuff in the garbage if they try to bring back another actor.
Yeah, so I don't think
Okay,
we're
that's
going to
fair.
see the return of Han. Although you did see what it wasn't a Force ghost. I'm not entirely sure what that was. We saw in Episode 9, but he did show up and talk to his son for a little bit.
Oh, what's that puddle on the floor? That was me in the theater.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
So I like the Palpatine return.
yeah. So it wouldn't be a surprise for you to hear that there is a sequel to this.
Nothing would
storyline.
surprise me.
Would you be interested in reading
Sure.
a sequel?
I will.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back to discuss whether it be the sequel or a different story entirely. But we'll have you back. Rachel, thank you for your time to discuss this.
It was delightful.
Okay, and I hope our viewers enjoyed our discussion.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe so I can bring you more content. And please leave a comment below.